Good day and welcome to another edition of the Military and Foreign Affairs Network. I am your host, the voice of reason. In today's episode, we want to take a hypothetical look if, in fact, Abiy Ahmed, with his Ethiopian National Defense Forces, which may number upwards to 500,000 troops, would have the ability to move back into the Tigray region, seize control of Mekelle, and then move further north by northeast, seizing Red Sea ports to give Abiy Ahmed access to the sea. Would Abiy Ahmed be able to do this? Well, the short answer is no. He would not be able to do this. So first, if we have a look at our map, the ultimate goal, possibly, of Abiy Ahmed is the Eritrean port of Assab. This location here. Now, the quickest route into Eritrea would be through the Afar region, this area here, and up the P7 highway, and then seizing control of the Red Sea port. Why this would be very difficult for Abiy Ahmed is the inhospitability of the terrain. Ethiopian/Abiy loyalist forces would essentially be confined to the A1 highway moving up north until they hit the Eritrean border, and then they would prosecute their war effort along the P7 highway up towards Assab. Now, the Abiy loyalist forces would have the benefit of air power or air capability. There has been much discussion about the fact that he has increased his drone attack capability over the last several years. We know that Abiy Ahmed possesses TB2, Bayraktar, and other Turkish-made high-quality drones, including some Chinese drones that are very effective. Now, do the Eritreans have the same capability? And the short answer is no. They have some capability. They do have some Russian kamikaze loitering drones that they have purchased from the Russians, and quite possibly some other systems as well. But they definitely don't have the same capability that you see from the Abiy loyalist forces. Now, at the same time, it does in fact look like we're seeing a massing of Abiy loyalist forces around the borders of Tigray. Now, if we go back to the situation on the ground post Pretoria Agreement, the Tigrayan Defense Forces were not defeated on the battlefield. The situation had become very difficult for the Tigrayan Defense Forces, but they were not militarily defeated. In fact, at one point, in all probability, the Tigrayan Defense Forces could have made a move towards the Ethiopian capital. They were not that far away, but through international pressure, they stopped. They quit their movement towards Addis Ababa. And essentially, through international pressure, did not attempt to take the capital. Now, one could argue that the TDF did have that capability. They could have moved into the capital and unseated Abiy Ahmed. But again, lots of international pressure, lots of financial interests as well, which put the pressure on the TDF to stop. At the same time, that's where we really started seeing the Abiy loyalist forces start to acquire some of those more advanced drone systems that made it very difficult on the TDF to later continue to prosecute the conflict. Now, was it an amount of drones that would have ultimately changed the possible outcome of the war? Probably not. We were looking at no more than a half a dozen drones operating at any one time, and each drone capable of launching approximately 2 precision-guided missiles. So again, if you look at the size and the scope of the conflict, not a great impact, but needless to say, they did impact the conflict. Now, if we fast forward today, where we're at now in terms of looking at a possible new Abiy loyalist forces move or push into the Tigray region and then ultimately into Eritrea. So it would be very, very difficult. Again, let's harken back to the original conflict in which the Tigrayan Defense Forces were essentially fighting a two-front war. They were fighting the full power of the Eritrean military, numbering 200,000 to 300,000 troops. At the same time, they were fighting in the west of Tigray. They were fighting tens of thousands of Amharan militias, and at the same time, they were fighting hundreds of thousands of Abiy loyalist troops as well. And to some extent, they were facing Afar regional forces that had at one point tried to push into eastern Tigray as well. That would not be the case in a current conflict. Remember, Eritrea is now supporting, because the enemy of my enemy is my friend, is now supporting the Tigrayan Defense Forces. So that two-front war, if a conflict were to break out, the Tigrayan Defense Forces, which still number approximately 100,000 troops in central Tigray, would not be facing a two-front war. In fact, more likely than not, currently, in all probability, they would be being supported to some extent by the Eritrean military. Because again, the whole dynamics of the conflict have changed. Compounding that, the situation in the Amhara region. Fano is now fighting the Abiy loyalist forces. So instead of the dynamic in which we saw Abiy loyalist forces, Fano, and the Eritrean army all attacking the Tigray region, it has reversed itself. Now, Eritrea possibly fully supporting the TDF. Obviously, we're not going to see the Tigrayan Defense Forces directly conducting combat operations with Fano, but right now, Fano is fighting the Abiy loyalist forces. Again, where at the time of the Pretoria Agreement, remember, Fano was fighting the TDF. So again, the whole situation has changed and inverted. So instead of the TDF fighting a two-front war, in some cases a 3- and 4-front war, they would be able to focus strictly on Abiy loyalist forces. That would be the primary enemy, and they would not have to worry about another front to the north and to the west. The whole paradigm of this conflict changes. The competencies of the Tigrayan Defense Forces in terms of generalship, leadership, and the capability of the frontline fighting units traditionally has exceeded that of the Abiy loyalist forces, especially if we were to see Abiy loyalist forces attempt to try and push back in towards Mekelle. Again, the Tigrayan Defense Forces would not be looking north this time at the Eritrean army. They would be able to focus all their efforts on the ENDF moving into the Tigray regional state. And that's what would happen. So again, would Abiy Ahmed be able to overcome the Tigrayan Defense Forces and then move into Eritrea? Well, the short answer to that is no. I would argue that in all probability it would be incredibly difficult for the ENDF to move into Tigray. And then compounding that, if they were able to inflict a military defeat on the Tigray Defense Forces and then move into Eritrea, that would be a very, very difficult proposition for the ENDF. So I do not believe at the moment the Abiy loyalist forces are actively entertaining and posturing for an actual all-out invasion of Eritrea and an attempt to move back into the Tigray region in force. Obviously, contrary to popular belief, the ENDF is not in the Tigray region in any meaningful way. There are some ENDF federal police forces that have a position in Mekelle near the airport, but that is about it. For the most part, the Tigrayan Defense Forces maintain control of all this area that you see in pink. And again, the whole concept of the TDF having to engage in this conflict along its northern border with Eritrea, again, that would be removed. And in all probability, we would see direct Eritrean support. And we're quite possibly seeing that now in some cases in terms of the Eritrean military providing support to elements of the Tigray regional state. But again, if we look at the fastest route in fact, is not through Tigray. It is moving through the Afar region and then into Assab, Eritrea proper. But again, very difficult, very inhospitable area to move forces. The ENDF just does not have the logistical capacity to move that size of a force through the Afar region and then into southeastern Eritrea with the full-on Eritrean army mobilized and fighting a defensive campaign against the ENDF. Now, there's also been some talk, well, why doesn't Abiy loyalist forces just move into Djibouti? Well, the capability, actually, of the armed forces of Djibouti, in all probability, in terms of training and competency and international support, exceeds the capability of the ENDF or the Abiy loyalist forces to move into Djibouti. If we harken back to some of the border engagements that took place between Eritrea and Djibouti, the Djiboutian forces really handed the Eritrean army a very, very hefty price for the Eritrean military to move into the border areas of Djibouti. The casualty rates and the defection rates of Eritrean troops when they attempted to move into Djibouti were fairly significant. In some cases, we were looking at 10-to-1 casualty rates by the Eritrean military. Up to 200 Eritrean troops were killed in that border conflict, and maybe a dozen to 30 armed forces of Djibouti were casualties in that conflict as well. So, again, that's really, in terms of international pressure, unlikely. International pressure would be least likely to respond to a Abiy loyalist forces move into Eritrea versus that of Djibouti. So that kind of sums it up. But again, the likelihood of this actually happening because of the capabilities, right? The capabilities of Abiy Ahmed to seize control of Tigray and move into Eritrea or vice versa simply would be very difficult right now. The Abiy loyalist forces are fighting an industrial strength insurgency that is taking place in the Amhara region right now. This area here, we continue to see flare-ups of fighting in western Oromia with the Oromo Liberation Army. And again, the situation right now for the ENDF is just not one that would leave me to believe that they have that capability to defeat either Eritrea or the Tigrayan Defense Forces currently. In fact, we could quite possibly, if conflict were to restart, And if the Tigrayan Defense Forces are prepared, which I would assume they would be, and again, not facing a northern threat from Eritrea, we could see another move by the TDF deep into B loyalist controlled areas, and quite possibly another move towards Addis Ababa. But again, you do have to take into consideration some of the technologies that Abiy Ahmed has acquired. So any offensive campaign from any side at this point could be, we could see quite a few more casualties on both sides of the conflict. And I think at this point, neither side really wants a conflict, and neither side is really prepared for a successful endgame to whatever conflict could arise. So again, we'll probably continue to see posturing, deployments of forces, maybe some scattered border conflicts. But again, an all-out war, I would say at this point, is probably unlikely. So there you have it. Thanks for joining us. More to come very, very soon. Have a good day.